I was standing in my driveway in Boulder, Colorado, watching Patricia Hendricks from the HOA slam yet another violation notice onto my windshield, when I realized this woman was about to make my winter a living hell. "Mr. Vaughn, this is your third notice," she announced, her voice carrying that particular pitch that only a truly committed busybody could achieve. "That storage unit has to go, today." I looked at the small weatherproof storage shed I'd installed 2 months ago. It was barely 8 feet by 6 feet, tucked against the side of my garage where it was barely visible from the street. Inside was my snow removal equipment, extra salt, backup generators, winter tools, and emergency supplies. Living in Colorado meant being prepared for harsh winters, and after last year's brutal season, I'd learned my lesson about keeping everything accessible. "Patricia, it's October. We're heading into winter. I need that equipment readily available when the storms hit." She crossed her arms over her chest, her perfectly styled blonde hair not moving an inch despite the autumn breeze. "The covenant clearly states no external storage structures without prior board approval. You never submitted the proper paperwork." I did submit paperwork, 3 times. "The board never responded to any of my requests." "Well, if you never received approval, that means it was denied. That's not how it works. You can't just ignore applications and then claim denial by silence." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "The storage unit goes, or you'll face daily fines of $500 starting tomorrow morning. The choice is yours, Mr. Vaughn." She walked back to her silver SUV, leaving me standing there with a violation notice in my hand and a growing sense of dread about the approaching winter. I'd moved to the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision 3 years ago, attracted by the mountain views and reasonable property prices. What I hadn't counted on was Patricia Hendricks being elected HOA president 2 years ago and immediately turning the neighborhood into her personal fiefdom. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer, David Chen, who'd helped me with the house purchase. "Yates, good to hear from you. What's Patricia done now? She's demanding I remove my winter storage unit, threatening daily fines starting tomorrow." David sighed. "Did you get board approval?" "I submitted applications in July, August, and September. Never heard back on any of them." "That's interesting. Technically, most HOA covenants require a response within 30 to 60 days. If they failed to respond, you might have grounds to argue implied consent. Can you send them a letter?" "I can, but honestly, it might be easier to just move everything into your garage temporarily while we sort this out legally. Fighting an HOA is expensive and time-consuming, even when you're right." I looked at my garage, already packed with my truck, tools, lawn equipment, and bikes. "There's no room in there, David." "Then rent a storage unit off property for now. Keep the peace, and we'll handle this properly through legal channels. I'll draft a letter tonight citing their failure to respond to your applications." After hanging up, I spent the rest of the afternoon calling storage facilities. It was mid-October, and everyone was either full or charging premium rates for climate-controlled units. I finally found a place 15 miles away that had availability, but it would cost me $200 a month, and more importantly, it would take me nearly 40 minutes round trip to access my equipment when I needed it. The next morning, I rented a truck and started moving everything from my storage shed to the off-site facility. My neighbor, Tom Richardson, came over while I was loading up my snowblower. "Patricia got to you too, huh? You had problems with her?" Tom laughed bitterly. "Last year she made me remove my kid's basketball hoop. Said it was an eyesore. It was a portable hoop we rolled out on weekends. Now my kids have to drive to the park if they want to play." Why do people keep electing her? They don't. Most people don't show up to HOA meetings. Patricia and her 3 friends vote themselves in every year. There's maybe 20 people out of 200 homes that actually participate in the elections. I made a mental note to actually show up to the next election as I finished loading up. By evening, my storage shed was empty, and I grudgingly dismantled it. Patricia drove by twice while I was working, watching with visible satisfaction from her vehicle. November arrived with unseasonably warm weather. Colorado's climate could be unpredictable, but the weather reports were calling for a harsh winter with an unusually cold system moving down from Canada by late December. I made sure my pipes were insulated, left cabinets open under sinks, and kept my heat running consistently. The first real cold snap hit in mid-November. Temperatures dropped to 15 degrees overnight, and I got a frantic call at 6 in the morning from my neighbor across the street, elderly Martha Williams. "Yates, my pipes are making terrible noises. Can you come look?" I threw on clothes and hurried over. Martha's house was freezing inside, barely 60 degrees despite her thermostat being set to 72. I checked her furnace and found it struggling. The system was old and needed replacing, but it should have been working better than this. "Martha, when did you last have this serviced?" "Oh, maybe 3 years ago. The HOA kept saying they'd arrange for a group discount if several of us got it done together, but it never materialized." I did what I could to get her heat running more efficiently and showed her how to let her faucets drip to prevent freezing. As I was leaving, I noticed several other houses on the street with older HVAC systems. The subdivision had been built 20 years ago, and a lot of the original equipment was reaching end of life. December arrived with a vengeance. The first major storm dumped 18 inches of snow on us in one night. I made the 40-minute round trip to my storage unit at 5 in the morning to get my snowblower, cursing Patricia the entire drive. By the time I got home and cleared my driveway, it was nearly 9, and I was late for work. The second storm hit a week later. Another 14 inches. Same routine, same frustration. I passed Patricia's house on my way to the storage facility and noticed her driveway was already perfectly cleared. She had the equipment right there, accessible, while I was driving across town in a snowstorm. On December 20th, David called me with news. "The HOA formally rejected your storage unit applications, all 3 of them. They can't retroactively reject applications they never responded to. They're claiming they did respond, via email in September. They've provided what they say is a copy of the rejection email." I never received any such email. I believe you, but proving you didn't receive an email is nearly impossible. However, I've found something interesting. The covenant section they're citing for the rejection actually expired 2 years ago. It was a 5-year supplemental rule that required renewal by membership vote. There's no record of that vote ever happening. So the rule they're using to keep me from having a storage unit doesn't exist anymore. Technically correct. I'm drafting a formal response. You have grounds to reinstall your storage unit. I already took it apart when I moved everything out. You still have it? Yeah, it's in pieces in my garage. Then I'd recommend putting it back up after I submit our response. If they want to fight it, they'll have to take you to court, and I don't think they want that. Christmas came and went. I spent it visiting family in Denver, grateful to be away from Meadowbrook Heights for a few days. My sister asked how the neighborhood was, and I spent an hour venting about Patricia and the HOA situation. "Why don't you just move?" she asked. "Because I love my house. I love the location, the mountains, the property itself. I'm not letting some power-hungry HOA president drive me out of my home." The day after Christmas, the forecast changed dramatically. A massive Arctic system was pushing down from Canada, bringing with it the kind of sustained cold that Colorado didn't see often. Weather reports were predicting daytime highs staying below 10 degrees for at least a week, with nighttime lows potentially hitting 20 below zero. David's formal response to the HOA went out on December 28th. I reinstalled my storage unit that same day, making sure every bolt was tight and the structure was more secure than before. I restocked it with all my winter equipment, pleased to have everything accessible again. Patricia showed up at my door at 7 that evening. "You were explicitly told that storage unit was not approved. And my attorney has informed you that the covenant rule you cited expired 2 years ago. Unless you want to go to court, Patricia, that storage unit is staying exactly where it is." Her face turned red. "You're violating HOA rules." "I'm not. The rule doesn't exist anymore. You should have renewed it when required. The board will discuss this at our emergency meeting tonight. You do that." She stormed off, and I closed the door, feeling a small sense of victory. It wouldn't last long. The cold arrived on December 30th. I woke up to a temperature reading of -8 degrees. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe when I stepped outside to get my newspaper. Everything was frozen solid. Tree branches creaked under the weight of ice. The snow from previous storms had compressed into hard pack that wouldn't melt for months. By New Year's Eve, the temperature had dropped to -15. I kept my heat running full blast, water dripping from faucets, cabinet doors open. I checked on Martha, who'd finally gotten her furnace replaced after the November scare. She was warm and comfortable. New Year's Day brought -18 degrees and the first emergency. Tom called me at 8 in the morning. "Yates, I've got water pouring through my ceiling." A pipe burst in my attic. I grabbed my tools and headed over. Tom's attic was a disaster. A copper pipe had frozen and split, and now that the house heat was thawing it, water was gushing everywhere. We got his main water shut off, but the damage was done. His ceiling had a massive water stain and insulation was soaked. "Did you have heat tape on these pipes?" I asked. "I didn't even know they were up here. The inspector never mentioned them when I bought the place." We spent the day helping Tom contain the damage and set up fans to start drying things out. As we worked, I heard sirens in the distance several times. Emergency services were getting calls. January 2nd brought -22 degrees and disaster. I was eating breakfast when my phone started ringing. First it was Sarah Mitchell from 3 houses down, burst pipe in her basement. Then Kevin Chang from the other side of the subdivision, burst pipe in his bathroom. Then elderly Frank Peterson. Then the Johnsons. Then the Kowalskis. I grabbed my tools and started making rounds. Every house I visited told the same story: older plumbing, inadequate insulation, pipes that couldn't handle the sustained extreme cold. Some had heat tape that had failed. Others had no heat tape at all. The subdivision was experiencing a catastrophic failure of aging infrastructure all at once. By noon, I'd counted 14 houses with burst pipes. By evening, that number had climbed to 23. People were panicking. Plumbers were completely overwhelmed, with wait times of several days for service. Hardware stores had sold out of pipe repair supplies, heat tape, and emergency equipment. I was helping the Martinez family in their basement when my phone rang with an unknown number. "Mr. Vaughn." "This is Patricia Hendricks." I almost didn't answer. "What do you want, Patricia?" "I'm calling because we have a neighborhood emergency situation. Multiple homes have experienced pipe failures." "I'm aware. I'm currently standing in water in the Martinez's basement." "Yes. Well, the HOA board has been discussing the situation, and we need to establish a centralized supply depot for emergency equipment and repair materials, somewhere residents can access tools and supplies quickly. That sounds like a good idea. Where are you planning to set it up? There was a long pause. That's why I'm calling. We need to use your storage unit. I had to pull the phone away from my ear because I started laughing so hard I couldn't help it. You're joking. This is not a joke, Mr. Vaughn. This is a serious emergency. Let me get this straight. You threatened me with daily fines to get rid of my storage unit. You made me drive 40 minutes round trip through snowstorms to access my own equipment. You told me it was a violation of HOA rules, and now you want to use it. The situation has changed. We need centralized storage. No. Excuse me. I said no, Patricia. You can't use my storage unit. Mr. Vaughn, this is a community emergency. The board has the authority to commandeer private resources in emergency situations. Show me that in the covenant. Better yet, have your lawyer send that in writing to my lawyer. His name is David Chen, and I'll text you his email address right now. You're being unreasonable. I'm being exactly as reasonable as you were when you made me dismantle this unit in October. Figure something else out. I hung up and went back to helping the Martinez family. My phone rang 4 more times with Patricia's number. I ignored every call. That night, I received an email from the HOA board. It was a formal request for me to allow the use of my storage unit as a community resource depot during the emergency. They offered to compensate me at a rate of $50 for the duration of the emergency. I forwarded the email to David with a note. Absolutely not. They made this bed, they can lie in it. David called me 20 minutes later. They're desperate. They should be. This whole situation could have been prevented. How so? David, this subdivision is 20 years old. Half these houses have original plumbing and HVAC systems. The HOA should have been planning for this, arranging group maintenance, setting up emergency response protocols. Instead, Patricia's been focused on harassing people about basketball hoops and storage units. You're not wrong, but people are suffering. And I'm helping them. I've been at 5 different houses today working on pipes. But I'm not giving Patricia the satisfaction of using my storage unit that she tried to ban. She could make trouble for you. Let her try. January 3rd brought negative 20 degrees and more burst pipes. The count was up to 38 houses now. The local news was covering the situation. Meadowbrook Heights was mentioned specifically as a subdivision experiencing significant cold weather damage. The reporter interviewed Patricia, who talked about the HOA's response efforts, and completely failed to mention that there had been no emergency preparedness plan in place. I spent the day helping where I could, but I was running out of supplies. The storage unit I'd fought so hard to keep was running low on heat tape, pipe repair materials, and emergency equipment. I made the drive to Colorado Springs, where stores were better stocked, and loaded up on everything I could find. When I got back, there was another notice on my door. The HOA was fining me $500 for operating a storage unit without approval. I took a picture of it and sent it to David along with the previous email acknowledging the storage unit's existence and requesting to use it. They're contradicting themselves in writing now, David responded. This is actually helpful for any legal action. January 4th brought a slight warm-up to negative 12 degrees, but the damage was done. 41 houses now had pipe damage. The subdivision's water system was under strain from all the emergency shut-offs and repairs. A plumbing company from Denver had sent a crew to help with the overflow, but they were still days behind. That evening I got a knock on my door. It was Tom, Sarah, Kevin, and 6 other neighbors. "Yates, we need to talk," Tom said. I invited them in and we gathered in my living room. Sarah spoke first. We all got letters from the HOA about your storage unit situation. Patricia's claiming you're refusing to help with the emergency. That's not true. I've been helping people all week. We know, Kevin said. You've helped half the people here in this room. But Patricia's spinning a narrative that you're being selfish by not letting the HOA use your storage unit. She's the one who made me get rid of it in the first place. We know that too, Tom added, and we're on your side. We're actually here because we want to do something about Patricia and this whole HOA situation. Like what? Sarah pulled out a folder. The annual HOA election is in February. We've been doing research on the bylaws. It only takes 25% of homeowners to call for a special election and a full board recall. There are 200 homes in this subdivision. We need 50 signatures. We already have 30, Kevin said. We're confident we can get the rest by end of week. Patricia's not going to like this. Patricia is about to face a lot of things she doesn't like, Tom said. Several people are talking about filing lawsuits over the lack of emergency preparedness. The HOA has a budget of over $200,000 annually, and nobody can account for where it's all going. Patricia's been president for 2 years, and there's been no infrastructure maintenance, no emergency planning, no capital improvements. You think she's been embezzling? We don't know, but we want a full audit, Sarah said. Will you sign our petition? I signed without hesitation. Over the next 3 days, the temperature slowly climbed back up to more normal winter levels, hovering around 20 degrees during the day. The immediate crisis was passing, but the damage was catastrophic. 47 houses had suffered burst pipes. Repair costs were running into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Insurance companies were overwhelmed with claims. The neighbors got their 50 signatures by January 7th. They submitted the petition for a special election and board recall to the HOA, with copies to every board member and certified mail to Patricia personally. Patricia's response was swift and aggressive. She sent out a mass email to all homeowners claiming the recall effort was orchestrated by malcontents who didn't understand proper governance. She specifically named me as a troublemaker who was undermining community cohesion during an emergency. David advised me to stay quiet and let it play out. The special election was scheduled for February 15th. In the meantime, the questions about HOA finances were growing louder. Multiple homeowners had requested financial records, as was their right under Colorado HOA law. Patricia delayed, claiming the documents needed to be prepared and reviewed by the board first. On January 21st, Tom and several other neighbors filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies, which oversaw HOA compliance. They alleged financial mismanagement, failure to maintain common areas and infrastructure, and refusal to provide required financial documentation to homeowners. 2 days later, a representative from DORA showed up at Patricia's house. I watched from my window as they spent over an hour inside. When the representative left, she was carrying several boxes of documents. Patricia sent out another mass email that evening, this one claiming she was the victim of harassment and a witch hunt by ungrateful homeowners. She said she'd devoted countless volunteer hours to improving the neighborhood, and this was the thanks she received. Several people replied all to her email. The responses were not sympathetic. Maybe if you'd spent less time harassing people about storage units and more time planning for winter emergencies, we wouldn't have 50 houses with burst pipes. Where's the money going? Our dues keep going up, but nothing improves. You're not a victim. You're an elected official who failed to do your job. The email chain devolved quickly, and eventually someone must have figured out how to shut it down because the replies stopped. February arrived with more normal Colorado winter weather. Cold but not Arctic. Snow but manageable. The subdivision was still recovering from the extreme cold event. Contractors were everywhere, fixing ceilings, replacing pipes, dealing with water damage. I'd spent over $3,000 helping neighbors with supplies and emergency repairs. I didn't expect to be paid back. These were my neighbors and friends, and it was the right thing to do. On February 3rd, David called with interesting news. The DORA investigation found irregularities in the HOA finances. What kind of irregularities? The kind that involve unauthorized payments to companies owned by Patricia's husband. Landscaping work that was billed but never performed. Maintenance contracts that were paid in full but only partially completed. It looks like she's been funneling HOA money to her family businesses for at least 18 months. That's embezzlement. It is. DORA is referring the case to local law enforcement. You might want to keep this quiet until it becomes official. 3 days later, a Boulder County Sheriff's deputy showed up at Patricia's house. Then another. Then a detective. They were there for 4 hours. When they finally left, Patricia was with them in handcuffs, being placed into the back of a patrol car. The neighborhood WhatsApp group exploded. People came out of their houses to watch. Someone started filming. It was a spectacle, and while I felt a little bad about the public nature of her arrest, I mostly felt vindicated. The local news picked up the story that evening. HOA president arrested for embezzlement was the headline. The report detailed how Patricia Hendricks had allegedly stolen over $75,000 from the Meadowbrook Heights HOA over 18 months through fraudulent contracts and payments to her husband's companies. The special election scheduled for February 15th was canceled since there was no longer a board to recall. Instead, an emergency election was scheduled for February 20th to establish an entirely new board. In the meantime, a court-appointed administrator took over HOA operations. One of her first acts was to review all outstanding violations and fines. She contacted me personally to apologize for the harassment about my storage unit and to void all related fines. She also sent out a notice that any homeowner who wanted to install a storage unit under 10 by 10 feet could do so with a simple notification to the HOA. No approval required. The February 20th election had unprecedented turnout. Over 150 homeowners showed up, the most in the subdivision's history. Tom was elected president. Sarah became treasurer. Kevin took secretary. The new board was a group of reasonable people who actually wanted to improve the neighborhood rather than control it. Their first action was to hire a forensic accountant to do a complete audit of the HOA finances under Patricia's leadership. The second was to establish an emergency preparedness fund and develop actual winter weather protocols. The third was to survey all homeowners about infrastructure concerns and create a long-term maintenance plan. Patricia's criminal case moved forward. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor wasn't interested. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, emails, invoices for work never performed, payments to her husband's company that coincided with family vacations and luxury purchases. The trial was in June. I attended one day, curious to see how it would unfold. Patricia looked diminished in the courtroom, nothing like the aggressive, imperious woman who'd slammed violation notices on my windshield. Her husband was also being tried as an accomplice. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing came in July. Patricia received 3 years in prison, and was ordered to pay full restitution of $78,000 to the HOA. Her husband received 2 years and joint restitution responsibility. Additionally, both were permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. The new HOA board used the restitution money to establish the emergency fund they'd planned and to start systematic infrastructure improvements. They hired a reputable management company to handle day-to-day operations and ensure proper financial controls were in place. By August, the subdivision felt like a completely different place. People were friendlier. Violation notices decreased dramatically, limited only to actual health and safety issues. The new board communicated regularly and transparently, publishing detailed financial reports every month. Tom and I were having a beer on my back deck one warm evening in late August when he brought up the storage unit situation. "You know, if you hadn't stood your ground with Patricia, none of this might have happened." "What do you mean?" "You refusing to back down, making her show her contradictions in writing. It started people asking questions. Why was she so focused on your storage unit when there were real issues to address? That questioning led to the financial investigation, which led to everything else." "I just wanted to keep my snowblower accessible." Tom laughed. "Yeah, but you ended up taking down a corrupt HOA president and reforming the whole system. Not bad for a snowblower." September brought another development. The county prosecutor's office announced that several other HOA presidents in Boulder County were under investigation based on Patricia's case, prompting a wider audit of HOA financial practices. Patricia's arrest had exposed systematic problems in HOA oversight and accountability. The state legislature announced they'd be considering new HOA regulations for the next session, including mandatory annual audits, term limits for board members, and stronger financial transparency requirements. In October, a year after Patricia had first demanded I remove my storage unit, I was standing in my driveway installing a new, larger storage unit. It was 10 by 10, the maximum allowed under the new simplified rules. Tom and several other neighbors had installed similar units. We'd learned our lesson about being prepared for winter. The weather forecast was calling for another cold winter, possibly as harsh as the previous year. But this time, the subdivision was ready. The HOA had stockpiled emergency supplies. Every homeowner had been given information about winterizing their homes. A neighborhood watch system was established so people could check on elderly neighbors during extreme weather. Professional emergency response protocols were in place. Patricia's house had sold in August. A young couple from California bought it, attracted by the mountain views and reasonable HOA fees. I'd met them at a neighborhood barbecue, and they seemed nice. When they asked about the HOA, I told them it was under good management now, but that they should always stay involved and pay attention. HOAs can go bad fast when good people don't participate, I'd said. David closed out my legal file in November. The HOA had paid his fees as part of their settlement with me over the storage unit harassment. He called to let me know everything was finalized. "You know, Yates, in 20 years of practice, I've seen a lot of HOA cases. Most of them don't end this well. Usually it's years of fighting, expensive litigation, and no real resolution. You got lucky." I don't know if I'd call 47 burst pipes and a neighborhood crisis lucky. Fair point. But you ended up with meaningful reform, the corrupt board member in prison, and a better system in place. That's a win in my book. December arrived with the first major snowstorm. 18 inches overnight, just like the previous year. I walked out to my storage unit, opened the door, and pulled out my snowblower. No 40-minute drive. No frustration. Just grabbed my equipment and cleared my driveway. As I was finishing, Tom came out with his own snowblower from his own storage unit. We waved at each other and both started clearing Martha's driveway without even discussing it. Sarah came out and started on Frank's driveway. Kevin was working on the elderly Kowalski's place. This was what a neighborhood should be. People helping each other, reasonable rules that made sense, and leadership that actually served the community rather than controlling it. The temperature dropped as winter progressed, but nothing like the extreme cold from the previous year. Still, we were prepared. The HOA's emergency protocols worked smoothly. When a couple of pipes did burst in older homes, the response was immediate and coordinated. The emergency fund covered temporary repairs while insurance sorted out permanent fixes. In February, the one-year anniversary of Patricia's arrest passed quietly. The new HOA board had their annual election, and most of the board members were re-elected. People were happy with how things were running. I ran into Patricia's husband once in March at a grocery store in Boulder. He looked tired and defeated. We made eye contact and he quickly turned away, apparently not wanting any confrontation. I didn't pursue it. He was paying for his crimes, literally and figuratively. Spring arrived, and with it came neighborhood improvement projects. The HOA had budgeted for playground equipment updates, new landscaping in common areas, and systematic inspection and maintenance of infrastructure. Everything was transparent, voted on, and properly documented. In May, a reporter from a Denver newspaper contacted me for a story she was writing about HOA reform in Colorado. She'd heard about what happened in Meadowbrook Heights and wanted to interview people involved. I spent an hour on the phone with her, explaining the storage unit situation, the winter crisis, Patricia's corruption, and the eventual reform. She also spoke with Tom, Sarah, Kevin, and several other neighbors. The article ran in June. How one man's storage unit exposed HOA corruption and reformed a neighborhood. It was a detailed piece about the importance of HOA oversight and homeowner involvement. The article mentioned how Patricia's laser focus on petty rule enforcement had blinded her to actual community needs, and how her embezzlement had diverted funds from essential infrastructure maintenance. The article quoted me, "I just wanted to keep my snow removal equipment accessible during winter. I never intended to take down the HOA board. But when someone's enforcing rules that don't make sense while ignoring real problems, eventually something has to give." The publicity brought attention to the new state HOA regulations that had been proposed. By August, the legislature had passed a comprehensive HOA reform bill that included many of the provisions advocates had been requesting. Mandatory annual audits, term limits, financial transparency requirements, faster response times for homeowner requests, and penalties for HOA boards that violated the rules. The governor signed the bill in September, and it would take effect January 1st of the following year. Several legislators specifically cited the Meadowbrook Heights case as an example of why the reforms were necessary. Tom called me after the bill signing. "Congratulations, you changed state law." "We changed state law. None of this would have happened without the whole neighborhood stepping up." "True, but you were the catalyst. You stood up to Patricia when a lot of us were just complaining quietly." As the second winter approached, I felt a sense of satisfaction looking at my storage unit, fully stocked and ready for whatever weather Colorado threw at us. It was such a simple thing, really. A small shed to store winter equipment. But it had become a symbol of something larger. The importance of common sense over arbitrary control, of community over power, of transparency over corruption. The neighborhood gathered for a Halloween party in late October, something the new HOA board had organized. Kids ran around in costumes while adults socialized over cider and donuts. Martha told me it was the first neighborhood event she'd enjoyed in years. When Patricia was in charge, everything felt tense, she said, like you had to watch what you said or did. Now it actually feels like a community again. The first snow fell in November, a light dusting that melted by afternoon. I checked my storage unit, making sure everything was organized and ready. Snowblower fueled and maintained, salt stockpiled, emergency generator tested and ready. Heat tape, pipe repair supplies, extra blankets, and emergency equipment all properly stored and accessible. December brought heavier snow and the routine became familiar. Wake up, check the weather, clear the driveway, help neighbors who needed it. The HOA's emergency protocols remained on standby but weren't needed. The infrastructure improvements were holding up well. The lessons from the previous winter had been learned. On New Year's Eve, I stood on my deck watching fireworks in the distance, thinking about everything that had happened over the past 2 years. A storage unit dispute had led to an HOA president's arrest, a complete board turnover, meaningful reform at both the local and state level, and a neighborhood that actually functioned like a community. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Happy New Year. Still enjoying that storage unit?" I replied, "Every single day." As midnight struck and a new year began, I thought about Patricia sitting in prison, probably thinking about all the choices that led her there. The need for control, the embezzlement, the petty enforcement of rules while ignoring real problems. If she'd just approved my storage unit application back in July, would she still be HOA president? Would the financial irregularities have continued unnoticed? Would we have faced the winter crisis without any preparation? There was no way to know, and it didn't matter anymore. The system had worked eventually. Corruption was exposed, justice was served, reforms were implemented. The neighborhood was better for it. I went back inside, my storage unit standing secure and legal beside my garage, ready for whatever came next. Sometimes standing up for something small leads to something big. Sometimes refusing to back down when you're right makes all the difference. And sometimes, a storage unit is just a storage unit, but the principle behind it is everything.